Good morning, everybody. Here we are. Are you ready for a continuation of my stories?
Yes.
Which circle around a particular theme, discovering the subjective truth, looking at things that seem in every way to be outside the realm of the real and the true. Okay, that's what I'm illustrating. And there's hardly anything more important than this in terms of working with those poor, unfortunate souls that end up being diagnosed schizophrenic, psychotic, or bipolar, or whatever the particular diagnostic term might be. The medical model, of course, occupies itself with measuring the distance between the patient's reality and the objective truth of the situation, which is assumed to be available to the clinician. That's boulder number 2 and boulder number 3 come together there. This medical model employs the doctrine of reality with a capital R. Anyway, I gave you just the barest beginning last week of a description of one of the most famous cases in the literature of madness. That's the first-person autobiographical writings of people who have passed through the greatest psychological crises that can happen in the human life. Some of these works being written after the fact, after a healing recovery has taken place. I Never Promised You a Rose Garden is an example of that. Other examples of it, though, being the writings of people who wrote down what they were experiencing, even as it was happening. And that's the story of Schreber, among many others, too. So he was, we'll just use the word madness, he was mad in the period of the writing of this book, but it was an attempt to get on top of what had afflicted him. Memoirs of My Nervous Illness, I had it written down last time. This book is discussed briefly in Abyss of Madness in Chapter 2. But I can give you a little more detail today about it than appears in the book. And it's such a good story, and it's an amazing story. And each of these stories stands for 1,000 other stories, okay? I'm just giving you a few examples piled together. But each one is illustrating a point that there are endless instances of if one takes the opportunity to pursue this way of thinking. So back to Schreber. Who was he? Let me just go over again the early details that I presented last time. A middle-aged German judge who lived in the late 19th and early 20th century. His memoirs, which of his nervous illness, are a record of what he experienced. It was published in 1911, but it would have been written over the decade before that, probably. I don't know exactly how long the period was that he was working on this on and off. Most of it, perhaps all of it, in a state of incarceration in a psychiatric asylum. Okay. The book, as I told you last time, begins. I recommend you buy this book, by the way. Like you should have, if you're going to go into this field, you need to start building your literature of madness. It gives you a window into a world that it can't be achieved in, can't be found in any other way than through the study of these readings. Anyway. The book starts seemingly reasonable, saying he wants to share with his readership important discoveries and reflections that have relevance for the future of society. But progressively, sentence by sentence, paragraph by paragraph, the thing gets weirder and weirder until about the third page in you realize the person is completely mad who's written this. But then it becomes a challenge to understand the content and the structure of that madness, and how can we apply the idea of subjective truth to the Schreber case. And we have the good fortune that Schreber was studied carefully, closely by Freud. Only his writing, not the man. Freud never met the man. Freud was not a psychoanalyst, therapist, or anything. He worked strictly from the memoirs of My Nervous Illness. We also have the advantage of further historical scholarship that took place like 50, 60 years later into Schreber's family background that shed a whole new light on the thing. Let's start with his madness, with the main ideas of his delusional world. It started out, as he recounts in his book, with a thought that entered his mind one morning that he knew with certainty could not possibly be his. What does a person do with the thought that is running through a person's mind that is known not to be his own? He wonders where that thought came from. Schreber did that. He drew the conclusion, a paranoid conclusion, that he was being persecuted. And his own psychiatrist was the persecutor and was inducing by means of some strange ESP, some strange telepathic hypnosis. He was being given instructions to have thoughts like this. And what is that thought? How lovely, how voluptuous it would feel to have sexual intercourse as a woman. That's what it was. It's so absurd and weird. You wonder, what? Now there are individuals, biologically men, who have a thought like this. It would be wonderful to be a woman and to experience sexual intercourse. There could be no greater joy. There are men who come to an idea like that. And it's really important to distinguish the different kinds of things that can happen, because let's imagine someone, and I've known a number of people who have had such thoughts. A man who just wants to be a woman in the worst way. And if he could just be a woman, and maybe he goes transsexual and actually has the surgical changes so he can at least approximate the anatomy of a female, and then begin to have a female's experience, including sexual ones. It would be one thing to be potentially or actually transsexual, to be one of the genders and want to be the other, but it would be your thought that's coming to you. There would be no question whose thought it was. Other people might not approve of it. They might just say, well, that's sick, or that's wrong, or that should be outlawed, or something's wrong with you. All the stupid prejudices of society would come into play. But the person would be having this thought, which might be embarrassing, might be objectionable to others, but it would be his own. What Schreber is telling us here is something utterly different than that. This is a complete catastrophe that is beginning to unfold. It's not a catastrophe to have the thought, if you're a man you want to be a woman. That's just your personality. It's coming out. Maybe you do something about it. Society is beginning to accept these things better now. Thank goodness. It only took 10,000 years. Anyway, but with Schreber it's different, because it's an experience of having your mind violated and invaded by a foreign force of some sort. That's what it is. And that was the nucleus of kind of an elaborate system of ideas, which I will now summarize again. Schreber came to the notion, and this is presented in bloody detail in his book, that his former psychiatrist, a man by the name of Flechsig, who became in Schreber's mind the essence of evil in the universe, had somehow conspired with the force behind all of creation, God, to perform changes upon Schreber's being. And the central change that they were trying to induce, and this thought that he had come into his mind was a part of it, was that he, Schreber, a respectable German judge, a man 100% through and through, instead be converted from being male into being female. The purpose of the conspiracy between Flechsig and God was to bring about a sex transformation, and not a sex change operation, a literal, actual conversion of someone who formerly had been male to someone now who would be female. And this conversion was going to be physical and physiological and hormonal, but also psychological. So that first thought that was injected, that's a woman's thought, beginning to take hold in a man's mind. The transformation is underway. Schreber also characterized the effort to convert him from a man to a woman with the term soul murder, which he coined. That's a very famous term that's thrown around a lot. There's a book about Schreber by that title, by a brilliant gentleman named Schatzman. I'll talk about his research and thinking in a moment. How does God perform this transforming operation? What's really happening? Well, I've drawn a picture on the board that kind of represents it. You have God, wherever God is, at the center of all creation. Flechsig somehow is his right-hand man. I don't think Flechsig is in heaven. He would be representing God on earth. The two of them have found a way to send rays out of heaven, strange energy vibrations through space that travel down through the Earth's atmosphere and swirl around Schreber and go around and inside his body and his mind changing the content of his mind, changing the structure of his body. Okay, that's the persecution right there. And Schreber felt it was important, since this was happening to him, to alert the world that such a thing could happen. That's the purpose of Memoirs of My Nervous Illness. And I suppose if this could happen, it would be pretty important. To him, this was not a matter of just an idea. This was the incontrovertible truth. So-called delusions in so-called schizophrenia, and I have problems with these words and all of this, but there are the beliefs that are described as delusions. There are the disasters that are described as schizophrenia. The ideas, the class of ideas that I'm talking about, of which this would be an instance, are always accompanied by a feeling of absolute certainty that it's true. Okay, so these are not just ideas that float in and out of your mind. That would not be a delusion. That would be an idea that floats in and out, or a fantasy. These things are the truest of all true things, known with absolute certainty. That belongs to the phenomenology of the so-called delusion. It's accompanied by a sense of absolute certainty. In a way, a delusion kind of is like an extreme exaggeration of the doctrine of reality with a capital R. Like, not only, that's the doctrine where the clinician thinks he knows what's absolutely real in the world and then can make judgment other people agree with it or not. The so-called psychotic patient is that way too, even worse, okay, even more certain. All right. So anyway, a few more details about what Schreber's life was like. He became completely unmanageable and was put in an asylum, had his own room, was in there alone, and is described by people who knew him at the time of just the word bellowing was used to describe what he would do. Like all night long, every night, 7 days a week, 31 days a month, 365 days a year, just bellowing, taking, I guess he must have slept some or he would have just died, but taking some time off, though, then to write his memoirs. Okay, so that's one aspect of what it was like. Nobody could make any sense of what he was saying. They thought he was suffering from dementia praecox. The term schizophrenia had not been coined yet, but he would be diagnosed as paranoid schizophrenic today if the same material were shown in a psychiatric setting. One other little detail that was a preoccupying and repeating theme in his delusions was that the people around him, including the psychiatric staff, the nurses, the orderlies, whoever the people were working there, the other patients in the hospital, I'm sure there were plenty of them, weren't really real. Instead, they were what he called fleeting, improvised men and women. They were illusions. They were transitory little entities who someone or had somehow been assembled to entertain him or for his benefit, but they had no independent reality or substance of their own. So his sense of his social world, this is part of his phenomenology, was one of being in the midst of something intrinsically unreal. Okay, the feeling that things were real was missing in terms of how he was experiencing the individuals that were around him. More real than anything else, though, was this idea of God and sending his rays and getting his body. Now, what was happening to his body? He had proof that this was happening because he would stand before a mirror. And here he was, maybe 45 years old, a healthy German male, and he noticed that his breasts were becoming enlarged. They didn't used to be that way. His chest was flat before, muscular, looked male, but now they were beginning to sag a bit. It was evidently, incontestably, the rays had come around his body and gone into his chest and begun to extend his breasts and make them more and more feminine. He noticed with great alarm as he stood before the mirror. I picture him. This is one of those things I've studied so much and tried to picture what it was like. I see a mirror on the wall. I see him standing there, nude. And he sees these breasts. Oh my God. And then he notices something else, even just as alarming or more so. He notices there's a slight curvaceousness beginning to appear in his body. A man's body should look like this. Straight as an arrow, masculine, definitive, strong. You shouldn't be all curvy. Your hips are sticking out on both sides. That's a woman's form. So the rays evidently have come down, swirled around, worked his breasts over a little bit. They're growing. His hips are flaring out a little bit. Whereas he used to look male, he's becoming decidedly female. Now, the book doesn't say this. It's a little bit censored of its content. But I am positive he would look at his penis as he was standing there before the mirror. Penis does not define a woman's body, it defines a man's. It was shrinking, I'm sure of it. Because that would be the confirming and frightening and terrifying and appalling evidence. Oh my God, my penis is getting smaller. It's only one thing was going to happen. Smaller, smaller, it's going to invert into a vagina. Okay? I'm being killed. Now it is not obvious that a man being converted to a woman is equivalent to the murder of the soul of that man. But there was an equation of those two in Schreber. So that's an important part of his phenomenology. And we can ask, and I'm going to try to answer what I think it is, that led him to equate those two things. Logically, it doesn't follow. But psychologically, they were completely, intrinsically entwined with each other. For a man to be turned to a woman is the matter of the murder of that man's soul. So you just have to kind of accept that as part of his framework and try to make sense of it. What happened to Schreber? He never got completely well. He would kind of go in and out of the delusional states and the bellowing, and my understanding is that he had some periods a little bit later in his life where he would be released from the asylum only to be returned to it. And I don't really know the details of his last years of life. I think he died in the asylum, or they may have let him out, and he got sick and died. I don't know what it is. But his tremendous effort he made to get on top of the great disturbance by writing his book did not, as far as I can see, eventuate in any genuine healing. Sometimes a person writes a book and you can see that the book contributed immensely to their healing, which actually took hold after a certain period. But my understanding of Schreber, that's not the case. So let me tell you about a man who came along and decided to study Schreber, Sigmund Freud. A copy of the manuscript, shortly after its publication, was sent to Freud. Freud read it. And it seemed to fit in to some evolving theories of Freud about sexuality and early childhood development. And so Freud undertook the task of creating a speculative psychoanalytic Freudian interpretation of Schreber's delusional world. And I think that Freud's analysis, as is always true of Freud, has a brilliant genius about it and a truth to it. But as is also so often the case, that truth is kind of upside down and backwards and misses something absolutely essential. So I want to see if I can go over that and explain to you why I'm saying that. What was Freud's analysis, first of all? He took a look at this struggle of a man with the sexual themes, sexual intercourse themes and all of this, struggle with God, and came to the following conclusion. I'm simplifying and summarizing it, but what I'm going to tell you, I promise you, is faithful to his analysis. You can look at it in any book that has Freud's great case studies in it, the case of Dr. Schreber. Freud thought that the delusional world of the patient was an expression of a romance between a little boy and his father. That God was a symbol of Schreber's father. That the raise and the turning of the little boy into a woman was a basically homosexual fantasy emerging out of a sexual longing for his father, for sexual union with his father. The content of the interpretation is actually similar to what Freud did with the Wolfman, too. It begins to be such a theme, you wonder what it might say about Freud and his relationships to sexual objects, including his father. I don't know. No one's really followed up on that in a way that has been convincing to me. But anyway, Freud's, in essence, it's this, that what Schreber wanted more than anything else in the universe is to be sexually united with his father. And the image of how nice it would be to be a woman and succumbing to sexual intercourse is a wish-fulfilling fantasy that he could be a woman, one that could receive the sexual, could be on the receiving end of the sexual longing and desire of the father. And the fact that it's a persecution in the delusion, that's Freud's interpretation of all that is that it's disguise. It's what you can, if you want something really badly in your heart of hearts, but you can't stand it that you would want such a thing, you might express the fulfillment of the longing but turn it around and upside down and turn it into something that is the opposite, seems to be on the manifest content level, the opposite of what it is that you most deeply desire. Let's see if I can summarize for you Freud's little simple theory of paranoia. See if you guys can follow this. There's a kind of two-step theory in how Freud understood the genesis of a paranoid state. And to a great extent, his idea here was derived from the study of Schreber. It goes like this. The underlying impulse in paranoia. Paranoia is defined by the feeling somebody's out to get me, somebody wants to kill me, I'm being followed, afflicted by persecutors. Okay, that's paranoia. But what paranoia is about is conflicted homosexuality. It's not what you'd expect necessarily. It's not obvious what sexual longing for a person of your same gender would have to do with the feeling that you're going to be attacked by persecutors. Freud said the following. It starts with, I want him. Just take the male case, but there would be a corresponding thing for women. I, as a man, am sexually drawn to you as another man. But I can't stand the thought, it's conflictual homosexuality. It's not like, I like you, I love you, you're luscious, you're great, you're cool, let's go get it on. No, you can't stand this thought in yourself. You can't, it goes against everything you've been raised to believe about yourself and do believe about yourself. So, you transform the experience of I want you into its opposite. I hate you. So love turns to hatred. That's the defense mechanism in Freudian theory known as reaction formation, where an emotional attitude toward another or toward an object is defended against by the cultivation of its opposite, basically. So passionate love for you on my part is changed to passionate hate for you and toward you that I'm feeling. But that's not even far enough. So Freud says, in addition to that, you need to get rid of the hatred. It's just, you don't even want to be dealing with any feelings you have toward this person that you really love, but you don't want to face that. So the mechanism of projection comes in. That's the ascribing of one's feelings towards someone to that other person. So I love you turns to I hate you, turns to you hate me, you're persecuting me, you want to kill me. That's it right there. It's very simple. It's mechanical. I don't think this theory works in most cases of paranoia that I've ever seen. But I have noticed this in the years that I've known a great many very deeply paranoid patients. It's uncanny how often there are currents of conflictual homosexuality that are there too. And I'm not saying every paranoid person is homosexual. Freud was kind of saying that yes, that is the case. I don't believe that that's right. But there is a correlation one sometimes sees in more cases than you would think of this. And you wonder what Freud maybe was onto something. Freud is always like that. He's onto something. He's put his finger on an important problem. The solution he's given to that problem may be wrong. But I'm just saying that. Anyway, how does this work with Schreber? I, Schreber, the little boy, want to be sexually united with my dad, in whatever way, whatever that would mean to me. Okay? That changes into God is persecuting me and murdering me. So it follows that sequence with the changes that are there in between the two. Okay? That's the essence of Freud's analysis. One way in which you could say that his analysis is brilliant is that it points to what is the heart of the origin of Schreber's difficulties. It lies in the relationship to his father. And it has to do with the currents of love and hatred that existed in that relationship. But let me now tell you about the further historical scholarship that occurred. It suddenly cast a whole new light on Schreber and helps us be able to see the subjective truth in his delusions. See, if you're looking for the subjective truth, you're looking for the way in which even this seemingly crazy system of persecution from on high and so on is going to be true. It's the symbolic level, the implicit level, the experiential phenomenological level, and understand how it might relate or be embedded in the life history that's there. So, anyway, in the 1960s, scholars looked into Schreber's family background. Schreber himself gives us nothing about his own family. You could say his memoirs on nervous illness are the story of his family, but it's so metaphorical, delusional, symbolic that there's no account of what happened when he was born, what his siblings were like, or anything. Memories of his parents, nothing at all. But there were independent sources of information about the family that people picked up on. And one of the discoveries of this search was the uncovering of a series of writings of Schreber's father, a man by the name of Moritz Schreber. And these would be writings that would have been created like in 1870s, maybe early 1880s. It's middle to late 19th century. What were the writings? They were manuals of child rearing. They were like little booklets that gave instructions to parents on the best way to socialize a child so as to produce in the rearing of that child a constructive, contributing, well-functioning, efficiently operating citizen of the country, in Germany. Okay? That's the purpose of these manuals. What's the philosophy behind it? What's the general kind of way that these manuals picture the task of socializing? In keeping with a lot of the thinking in Europe and in Germany in particular at that time, which was very authoritarian, the notion was that the best of what you're doing when you socialize a child is you're subduing and basically killing the savage beast, the animal, the wild animal that a child biologically and naturally is. You have to kill this beast, and once you subdue and kill it, then you can go about the process of teaching it, what remains of it, the child, to perform the tasks that society demands and contribute in the way that it would be regarded as desirable. So there's a sense or an image of murder actually in the philosophical background of assumptions of the child rearing itself. Now, what about the content of it? Well, he tells you what you can do, and I'm going to give you some examples of it. Here's the genius of the later scholars, including Schatzman, who wrote a book about this. They realized that if we look at the child rearing manuals of Schreber's father, Moritz Schreber, we have a window into what happened in Schreber's childhood. If you just make the simple assumption, this man practiced what he preached. It seems likely. Now, you could be wrong. Maybe he was a loving father, not killing any beasts or anything like that, and he just wrote books about it. But the likelihood is, I doubt it. It's going to tell you, people who write books about child rearing are drawing upon their own experiences or espousing a philosophy they will try to embody in their own work with children. So the book consists of a set of instructions of various procedures a parent can put upon a child that will assist in the subduing, taming, killing of the beast, and get the child to conform and comply and fit in with what he or she might need to do as a productive citizen of the country. So you can make a list of these procedures, and they come with diagrams because he had certain pieces of equipment that he thought would be useful with the children. Okay, so what would be examples of this? Well, one was a set of procedures for teaching children good posture. This is only one element in 100 elements in subduing the animal and the beast. Like a child, if you don't give him any training at all, he'll just slouch around all the time and do something like this. You want him standing up straight, proudly. If a child sits down at the dinner table and has a bowl of soup before him, the child left to his own devices will just be like a dog, put his face right in the soup and slurp it right up, or pick up the bowl and spill half of it down his chest. But what does a civilized citizen do with a bowl of soup? He sits down properly, sits very straight, ramrod straight, takes nice spoonfuls, not completely full so it will be spilled, and almost geometrically raises it up like this, and takes the soup in a quiet manner, none of that. You don't want any of that, okay? So you want to teach a child to do that and be like this, not sitting slurping of all this. You know what it's going to be. So Schreber's father, Moritz Schreber, and the manuals contain these diagrams, and the diagrams are duplicated in the book Soul Murder by Schatzman. He had like a device where you would wrap big leather straps around a child's chest, circling around to his back. Up the middle of his back was a metal rod going all the way up to the top of his head, straight up, so the child's chest is strapped to the rod, so he's forced to stay in a completely upright, rigidly vertical position. Then around the ahead, a metal cup extends from the rod and clamps onto the child's jaws and chin like this, and holds it rigidly so he can't go like that or like that or like that, like that or like that. He's just perfectly geometrically rigid, and his face is facing out at a perfect right angle. And then when the child sits down to have soup, he will sit down like this. And the only way he can eat is like this, and he can't even go like this. All right? But you see, it's wonderful, because what's the child going to do naturally? Slurp, 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 talk all the time. You don't want that. You want like conformity. You want efficiency. You want order, order, order is it. That was one of the procedures. Schatzman and other scholars who looked at this, they kind of outlined the various procedures. There are maybe 10 of them. I'm going to tell you one more in just a moment. But then they noticed something. If you look at the details of Schreber's delusional persecution by God and Flechsig, who were trying to convert him to a woman, there was an odd point-for-point correspondence. It was sometimes metaphorical, sometimes almost quite literal, between the delusional persecutions he talked about being inflicted on him on the one side, and these child-rearing procedures on the other. Schreber talked about miracles that happened. A miracle in Schreber's delusional world was a persecution. It was a supernatural intervention onto his body, produced by the rays that come down and swirl around him and inside of him. And one of the great miracles is the turning of him into a woman. That's what's happening progressively over time, and this is murdering his soul in the process. But another miracle was called the chest compression miracle. So Schreber described how these rays would come down from heaven and circle around his chest in gradually and tighter circles, and would finally begin to impact his flesh and squeeze it and stop him from breathing. It was so tight. So you can look at the chest compression miracle produced by the rays from heaven and compare it over to the posture device that Schreber's father used almost certainly on his own children. Why would he not have tried out what he recommended for all German children? I'm sure he did. So there's that. Here's another one. Schreber talked about something called the freezing miracle. The freezing miracle would be where rays came down from heaven, circling around him, and the temperature of the air around his body would plummet until his whole body was just surrounded by freezing temperatures. It's extremely painful and terrifying to have this happen. Why would God do this? It's a part of the procedure he's doing for the murder of his soul and converting him to a woman. What would correspond to that in Schreber's father's upbringing manual? Ice baths. The father recommends the following. I'm going to describe it to you. A very fine way, perhaps the best way to really begin the training of children and the making of them into productive citizens and the killing of the beast is to subject them to early ice baths. So what you do is you take a child as young as 3 months old, 2 months old, and prepare a bath of ice cubes and water. So the water is at 32 degrees, 0 degrees centigrade, okay? You take the child in the morning, awake or asleep, it doesn't really matter. Here comes the child, cooing, and you submerge him in the ice water. Schreber's father describes in the manuals how the child normally will respond if you do that. Screaming, kicking, thrashing, weeping, flushing, like that. But then he also said, if you administer this repeatedly, day after day, it is truly astonishing how much progress you can make after only a few of these ice bath immersions. Because children as young, and according to the father, as young as 3 months, make an adaptation finally so that after maybe a week or 2 of this, you can take them in the morning and submerge them in the ice bath, and they don't show any response at all. None at all. And what a astounding jump of progress that has been to subdue this little monster that wants to fight and scream and flush and yell and, hit you and everything else, right? You've just made a giant step toward really establishing the basis for getting this kid to conform to the needs of society and become the citizen you want to see him be. Now, what would we say about a child who, after a few immersions, has gone in, now is able to go into that ice bath without any protest, without any real visible reaction at all? I think we would say this child has been harmed terribly. he probably has done whatever is the early equivalent of a dissociative reaction, of a cutoff from his own emotional experience, in order to a numbing of his spirit, and a numbing of his body, so that he doesn't have to feel the traumatic transition of temperature of the ice bath. That's what we would say today. A person would be arrested and put in jail for doing something like this, but not at that time. So that gives you a little bit of flavor. And you should, if you have a chance sometime, look at Schatzman's books, because you can kind of have a column of the procedures the father said, like the ice bath, the posture device, and a whole bunch of other weird devices and actions that are taken. You can line them up with the miracles that God was performing. And so you begin to see that the persecution Schreber describes seems to mirror what you and I would consider an actual persecution in his family by his father, in the attempt to make him into the person he wanted him to be. So then, if you look at it that way, and we know that Schreber grew up to be a very proper man. He went to law school. He was elected a judge. He was perfectly functioning until one day this weird thought came into his mind that it would be nice to be a woman and succumb to sexual intercourse. Okay, and that was part of the whole unfolding then of the delusion. So the delusion can be seen as actually the carrier of the truth of this man's history as he experienced it. But it's confusing and hard to talk about, because I'm sure Schreber did not experience his childhood as a persecution. He was too busy. You'd have to be there to feel this persecution more strongly than he was, because he'd been trained from an early life not to be there, but just to comply. Here's a thought about why converting him to a woman is the same thing as murdering his soul. I think it has to do with the historical stereotypes. What would being a woman mean to a man in, let's say, the year 1870, 1880, 1890? It might mean the ultimate of passivity and compliance. Now, women are not made of passivity and compliance, but that might be a desirable stereotype for what a woman's all about. A man becoming a woman would mean the loss of the man's independent will, his assertiveness, his strength to defend himself, to run his own life, to choose his own path. It would mean the giving up of all of that would be the equivalent of being a woman. So converting him to a woman is kind of like inculcating and cultivating more and more and more cooperativeness, compliance, passivity. That would be the understanding of the whole thing. Okay? What happened to poor Schreber? Nothing good happened. But it helps me to understand him and understand why he'd need to write this book, that there would be a driving desire to produce symbols of what he had been through. It's the buried reality. Now back to Freud for a minute. I picture Schreber all through his childhood as actually having told himself that he loved his father without limit. And nothing was more important to him than pleasing his father. I think he complied and surrendered to all these procedures as best he could to hold on to a connection with the father, and kind of didn't let himself feel the violence that was being done to his own mind. But that violence finally comes out in the form of this later set of psychotic episodes that I've described to you guys. So, poor Schreber. I've had fantasies of being Schreber's analyst. I've tried to imagine, this is talked about a little bit in Abyss of Madness. What could one have done for a man like this, given an understanding now, the understanding we now have about Schreber? And I don't really know, but I picture if I had been working in that asylum and had all the time in the world, and you would need it with him too, I would have just sat with him. I would have been very excited to read his writings. I would have studied them really carefully. I would have worked hard not to see his ideas as delusions. I would work, if he was hallucinating, hearing voices speaking to him, and so on, I would try not to hear those things as voices, as hallucinations. As soon as you think of something as a delusion, the concept of delusion is bound up. I haven't really gone over this carefully enough. Maybe I will next time. It's bound up with the doctrine of reality with a capital R. Delusion, by definition, is a false belief somebody clings to in the face of all counter-evidence and in the face of all logical argument. But how do we judge something's false? By comparing it with what we know to be true. You're back with the doctrine of reality with a capital R there. So I would have tried to be outside of that. I picture just sitting with this man basically every single day of the week, months, maybe years, really, and just trying to give him an experience of someone listening to him who was not regarding him as crazy. And I imagine I might even have told him, if I had begun to catch on to the metaphor of the subjective truth inside the delusions, I might have even said to him, guess what, brother? I don't think you're crazy, not crazy at all. What I think is you're speaking the truth. You're telling the truth that no one has ever listened to, and I'm here to hear it. Tell me more about it. I would have been like that. I would have been unstoppable. Every day I would be back there. If he threw me out, I'd come back the next day. I wouldn't let him hurt me. And I don't know whether he would have tried to hurt anybody or not. But I picture just giving him an experience of actually being listened to, knowing that he had been raised in a family that not only did not listen to him, but insisted upon instilling layers and layers and layers of compliance and cooperation and accommodation and surrender to the agenda of the Father to raise these perfect children. Okay? Let me tell you another story that is so parallel I can't believe it. This is a patient I did work with, to no avail therapeutically, unfortunately. I feel real bad about it. I wish I had another chance with her, too. This is a story that goes back, well, it's 1969, so whatever that is, 43 years, I guess. Okay, but it's like yesterday, and I have to hesitate a moment to put myself back in the mood to remember the interactions we had with the woman, and then the weeks that I ended up spending with her trying to help her. One fine Monday morning in 1969, I was attending our early staff review of the patients that came in over the weekend. And usually 4 or 5 new ones would have come into the hospital, into the inpatient unit. And the chief psychiatrist, a couple of psychiatric residents, a social worker, me, another psychologist were there, and an orderly or two, our art therapist or something. And we'd go over the case material, and then we'd bring the patient in to talk to briefly that we had just reviewed. And so the particular first case we looked at this morning turned out to have been brought to the hospital by the Secret Service. Why? Because she'd been picked up on the front lawn of Harry Truman, who was alive in 1969 still, ex-President Truman. She had been trying to break into his house. And it wasn't unusual for us to get the patients from brought by the Secret Service. Independence, Missouri is a suburb of Kansas City, Missouri. And so our hospital was the receiving unit for lots and lots of things in the whole surrounding geographical area. And you would be shocked how many crazy people try to go see the president and the ex-president. They're just coming from all over the world to get at this person who they think will have the answer to their problems. So she had been brought for that reason, and she wasn't able to talk coherently when she came to the hospital, so we invited her in. And I want to kind of try to recapture the interview that then took place. Imagine the scene. Here's George Atwood, chief psychiatrist, a couple of residents, another psychologist, and a nurse. So let's just say it's that. And we bring a woman in who was a short little woman with all white hair. She was 55 or 60 years old. And I'll call her Sophie. And so we said, Sophie Smith, we said Schmidt, she was a German woman. So we called her by her last name, Ms. Schmidt. Tell us what happened that you're here in the hospital. And she wasn't able at first to answer this, and so we said, well, the police brought you from the front yard of Truman, and what were you doing there? And she answered in a strange-sounding voice, I'll try to imitate it, Truman has my head! We said, Truman has your head? He has my head, it's in his house, I came here to get it. I came on the bus from New York City. Truman has my head! And so I remember the psychologist on the team, I was a postdoctoral trainee. He stood up, his name was Frank Mora. He walked over to her and very gently put his hand on her head. He said, but Ms. Schmidt, your head is right where it should be. She roared at the top of her lungs, Truman! So if you tried in any way to contradict her, she'd do this rolling R. You know, Truman! No, we couldn't even tell why that was that, or was she telling him he was Truman, or what was it? But Truman has her head. This is a delusion, a belief that is clung to in absolute certainty. It was somewhere in his house. She couldn't go into any detail about it, but she knew it was there. She was here to get it back. It had been taken from her. There was more to her tale of woe. And she was able to carry on with the further explanation. She said that Truman had entered into a conspiracy against her. It's similar to Flechsig and God. This is Truman and the Con Edison Company. And what they had done is set up immense machines, like giant tubes, like long metal telephone poles, but they're hollowed out inside. There's a whole bunch of them. They're like maybe bound together or something. They're 50, 60, 70, 80 feet long. And they're connected to an immense machine in a building. She didn't know where this machine was, somewhere in the Manhattan or surrounding greater New York City area, but it's there. And the machine generates energy, and rays come out of the tubes, and they go into the atmosphere and stratosphere. They kind of shoot through the sky, and then they converge like the rays from God around Schreber. They come zooming down on this woman, Sophie Schmidt, I'm calling her. And what happens when they get to her? They go right into my vagina. That's what she said. And what happens then when they go into your vagina? Right? This is funny, and it's okay to laugh, but it's horrifying. And there's nothing wrong with laughing. You hear a thing like this, you go, oh my God, what the heck is this? But she's not making jokes at all. This is a terrifying catastrophe she's in the middle of. So they come down here, they go right into her vagina. I have this more or less indicated on the board here. This is her. So the vagina, and it gets inside there, these rays. And then what happens then? Well, they start like rising up inside her body. They go into the different organs, and they start climbing up and vibrating up and vibrating up. And she used a word for what this process of penetration upward was. And it's either an obscure mythological German reference to something, or it's a neologism, a made-up word altogether. But the word was Warmeling, W-A-R-M-E-L-I-N-G. It may have just been an invented word that comes out of I don't know what, or it may be a mythical snake in certain German fairy tales. I've read about that. I've wondered about that a lot, what it was. But when it gets up into her throat, this Warmeling process, it causes a materialization of something. What is it that forms in her throat? A little man. And then she said, we were looking at her, and she goes, it starts making really strange, freaky noises, and I'm going to imitate those. And then she goes, holy Moses, holy Moses. And then, but it wasn't over. Then she said, did you hear that? Did you hear that? Yes, we heard that. That wasn't me. It wasn't you? I would never say that. I don't say holy. I'm a good girl. I'm not holy Moses. Oh, I don't curse. I'm a good girl. Oh, she did it again, okay? And one of us might have been stupidly me saying, well, what do you mean you didn't say it? It just came right out of your mouth. Nah, it came out of my mouth and out of my throat. Then she's explained about how there was a little man that lived in her throat. And what would happen is to her, and as long as I knew her, and I knew her for maybe 4 or 5 weeks, and I'll tell you what happened there between her and me, she would go back in and out of this state where she would make this whoop, whoop, whoop noise, and then comes the holy Moses, and then more often than not say, did you hear that? That wasn't me, I'm a good girl. Holy Moses to her was like the worst cursing in the world, and she must have come from some value system in which that would be the case. Holy Moses is the worst thing in the world. I say things about 1,000 times worse than that right in my lectures. How about throwing a few F-bombs? But we didn't say that to her. To her, Holy Moses was much worse than anything you could say. Sacrilegious. Boy.